Now, with all that theory out of the way, let's get back to our code and let's start writing more code, because that's what we're all here for in the end. So I'm back in that HTML file, that index HTML file we created earlier, and it's still the only file. I do have a second file in my folder now. That is a file you don't have right now and you don't need right now. It's just a file for me that helps me manage my code and make it easier for me to provide code snapshot attachments in this course. So that's not a file, this gitignore file which you have. And therefore this index.html file is still the only file we have here. And now I want to work towards that end result we want to have, towards that first website we want to build here. And that means that, for example, here, instead of saying hello world, I want to say max challenge for, and then the current date. Because keep in mind, we're building this daily challenge website where we can set ourselves a daily challenge and make it public to the world to put some pressure on ourselves. And therefore here the title for this website should be your name, challenge for, and then today's date. And that could, for example, be Wednesday, August 4th, something like this. So that's now my new title, but of course that still just gives us such a heading. The only thing that changed now is the text content, but it's still a H1 element. And hence, if we load this in the browser, we still just see that text content here formatted as such a title. By the way, make sure you always save your code files after you change them. Here in the Visual Studio Code, you can tell that a file has unsaved changes by this white dot which you see next to the file name. Now, if you load your page in the browser, you only see the latest saved version. So to see those latest changes, you need to save that file. And you can do that with File Save, or of course, way quicker by using the shortcut which you see here. And I'm using this shortcut all the time here in this course, and I recommend that you also use it all the time whenever you change something. Press that shortcut, by default Control S, or on macOS Command S, and ensure that you save those changes you made to your code. However, I now want to add a second HTML element here. I want to add more content to this page. And the content I want to add is the concrete goal I have for today, which could be that I want to learn about the basics of web development, specifically dive into HTML and CSS. That could be my goal for the day, that I want to dive into those technologies. So that's now the second piece of content I add, and very important, I add that outside of my first HTML element. So after this closing HTML tag, I'm adding this plain text like this. Now if we save it like this, and I reload my page, we therefore now see this text here. And that is important and not necessarily obvious. We see this text here, even though this is actually not wrapped in HTML tags. Remember what I said in the last lecture, that the browser is quite forgiving? You should describe your content because that adds more meaning for search engines and people with assistive technologies, but you technically don't have to. It doesn't matter which element you choose or if you use an element at all. It's just that some meaning might be missing. And whilst visually this page works for us if we're not blind, people that are blind or search engines would see less than we do at the moment. They would see that there is some text, but they wouldn't know if that should actually be a title or if it should be just some regular text. And that's why we should not add plain text like this, but why we should also wrap this in some HTML tags to turn it into an HTML element. Because you want to add meaning to every piece of content you add to your page. But what is the meaning of this text here? It's certainly not another title. We have one main title. Now that's kind of the content that belongs to that title. So I would say it indeed is just some regular text, a paragraph of regular text. And therefore we now want to use a different HTML element. We don't want to use a H1 element again. Now I showed you this HTML element reference on MDN, and you find a link to this reference attached. And there we can look for another element that might make sense here. Now, if you're here for the first time, this can be overwhelming because there are loads of elements, and hence I'll speed this up a bit. We know that we have some text content, so we want to find a fitting element for this specific text content. And we don't really have a quote here. We also don't really have a figure here or anything like that. But I would say we have a paragraph here. And that's a very common HTML element. As a web developer, you're going to use the P element a lot because you work with text a lot, with standard text. And if you have a standard paragraph of text that's nothing else than just regular text, the P element, the paragraph element, is your friend. So therefore here, I'll go back to my code and I'll wrap this text with the P tags. And I'll grab that closing tag here and add it after this text. And now we added our second element. We turned this plain text into a paragraph element where the content now is that text. But now we added more meaning. Now, visually, if we reload this page, it looks exactly as before, so it has no visual difference here in this case, because the paragraph text, unlike the heading here, which we had before, doesn't get any default styling by the browser. But from a semantic perspective, so the meaning that is presented to search engines and assistive technologies, we did now improve our content. And that's now the second HTML element we added therefore.